Greetings and welcome to the Archivists Respond to Climate Change teach-in, hosted here by the School of Library and Information Science at Louisiana State University. My name is Dr. Ed Benoit III. I'm the Associate Director in the School of Library and Information Science. I am also the coordinator of the Archival Studies program, as well as the Cultural Heritage Resource Management program. And I will be hosting the teach-in here online for you. Before we get started, I just wanted to say a little bit about what you will see. Rather than going in depth into everything that we could possibly talk about climate change and its impact on archives and cultural heritage institutions, I'm just going to focus on two aspects. The specific aspects of how climate change is impacting preservation and what could possibly be done about that. There are many more things that could be said, and I encourage you to engage in discussion online after watching this short video. So I do have some learning objectives for this video. Upon completion of this module, you should be able to discuss the preservation factors impacted by climate change, identify preservation-related climate change threats for your region, propose an action plan for integrating climate change threats within disaster management protocols at your institution, and discuss archival and cultural heritage-related practices related to climate change. So the first thing we really need to look at is what is the current state of the global climate. Here's an image from NOAA's monthly briefing. This is about July. It was posted in August of 2019, and I'm including the source here as well. But as you can see, we're already exceeding 20th century averages. While this was not the hottest July on record, it is one of the hottest Julys on record. For those of you in Baton Rouge, you will also note that we are currently going through the hottest September on record. But the overall trends here across the world are record warm temperatures throughout the year, but particularly in the summer months. Of particular note this summer were the extreme temperatures in Alaska. July was the warmest month of record, completely, not just of all Julys in Alaska. There were all-time record high temperatures. It followed the warmest spring on record, and it began a big wildfire season in Alaska. There was also severe melting of permafrost in Alaska, Greenland, and other areas of the world. So what does this mean for us? Well, what I just want you to understand is that global warming, climate change, it's already here. And so we need to start actively thinking about what archives and cultural heritage can do to mitigate some of these issues. Now, recently, over the past year, a group of archivists, Ben Goldman, Ira Tanzi, and Whitney Ray, have been focusing on gathering and documenting archival repositories in the United States. This is surprisingly something that hadn't been really done before, and they were trying to really just figure out map out all of the archival repositories in the U.S. so we can get a better sense of potential issues related to climate change as well as other issues. So these are some findings from their presentation to RBMS in 2018. In completing their study, they contacted over 150 archival organizations. This is not just repositories, but regional institutions, such as the Society of Southwest Archivists, the Louisiana Archives and Manuscript Association, etc. And they found 30,000 raw preliminary repository locations. They then worked on cleaning this out to 15,000 to almost 16,000. Although not everything is identified, they're still working on this project, but the results are quite impressive. Now, in the discussion below, I will be including some links, and including links to this data that you can actually look at and manipulate if you would like. What was really interesting with this data is looking at the Gulf Coast repositories. And you can see here this includes a wide range, but you see just how many different repositories are located along the Gulf Coast, which is a primary area of interest for us here at LSU and within the Gulf Coast region due to sea level rise as well as hurricane potential. Now, many experts have predicted that there may be a 6-foot sea level rise over the course of the next decades due to climate change. And when you put this onto the map of institutions, as you see here, you will quickly notice what really starts happening. This would be the expansion of Lake Pontchartrain, New Orleans severely impacted, the entire coastline further erodes, and even Baton Rouge is getting very close to the coastline. But already we are seeing archival repositories that would no longer exist. They would be underwater. The same can be said here for Texas, as we see the coastline becoming much more inland than it used to be. And we can see a lot of these, particularly over by Galveston Bay and south. But over here is more Louisiana with Lake Charles right up here. And then finally we have a close-up here on Florida. So you can see Key West is completely gone, but all of these coastline areas are at severe risk. And this is just purely based on sea level rise. Now, this presentation wasn't the end of their research study. They also have produced an article in Climate Risk Management. I provide the link here. I'll also provide it down below, where they took into account the 500-year floodplain, predicted sea level rise, and in this case they were looking at 1.8 meters, potential storm surge from a Category 5 hurricane, the increase or decrease in temperature, the temperature change, and the maximum annual precipitation, as shown on all of these maps. And you can see here what the Category 5 storm surge plus sea level rise would equate to. And again, if we look here at the coastlines, you can see that they quickly become eroded, and much further inland, particularly in Louisiana, is at risk. This past spring, the National NOAA, the National Weather Organization, put out new storm surge hazard maps that are even more threatening. This is not a future projection. This is the current storm surge hazard map. The image here is particularly for a Category 5 hurricane, and as you can see, Baton Rouge is underwater according to this. Chunks of Houston, the entire, almost the entire Atchafalaya Basin, and then you have other areas right along the seawall. And I encourage you to go to the actual maps. And they're not pulling up right now. So here are the actual maps from the National Hurricane Center. And if we look at these, we can see some of the changes. This would be a Category 1. Let me zoom in. Category 2, 3, 4, 5. So Baton Rouge is actually at risk just with a Category 2 hurricane. So not to be all doom and gloom here, but the climate change threats are real. While I just showed you the Gulf Coast and sea level rise, it's not just limited to the Gulf Coast and sea level rise. There are increased frequencies of extreme events. This includes heat waves, as we've been seeing over and over again. The polar vortex or polar vortices during the winter months, more severe storms, more severe blizzards, both in frequency and severity, the increased amount of forest fires, and I'm including here civil unrest. We have not seen this yet, but as we have more and more extreme events, there's reason to be concerned that we may start seeing some civil unrest. This could include rioting, particularly after some of these events, things like that. Now, it's important also to note that the impact on disaster management, we need to think, we've always thought about the immediate response. What happens immediately after a hurricane? How do cultural heritage institutions recover after a massive storm? And the immediate response, we're always thinking 1 day to 1 week. But we really need to take into consideration not just the response, but the recovery. And as we can see with recent hurricanes, both Puerto Rico, the Bahamas, even Houston. The recovery is not just a day, a week, it's weeks, months, and years. So we need to increase our planning both for the immediate and the long term. And you would think this would be a no-brainer, that, well, of course, we know this, and repositories are probably all worried about this, so of course they're taking this into consideration. Well, this is not necessarily true. Back in 2005, the Heritage Health Index report showed that 80% of repositories had no emergency or disaster plan. Now, this study was replicated in 2014, and those results have recently become available. And the positive news is that, well, now 42% of repositories do have a plan. This is up from 20%. That's great. But only 1 in 4 have both a plan and the staff trained to implement the plan. So it's not just having a plan, but making sure that you've trained your staff, that you actually go through exercises and you make sure everybody is aware of what to do in these situations. So beyond just emergencies, what else do we need to consider? Well, we really need to think about the rising HVAC, and I misspelled that there. I'll fix that later. The HVAC related energy costs. This is climate control, which is of primary concern for archivists, for museum curators, and other cultural heritage institutions. Goldman, in a recent chapter, stated, quote, "Overall, the world's leading consumer of energy to power data centers is the United States, where we use 25% of the world's energy despite having less than 5% of its population. Virginia is home to data centers operated by Facebook, Apple, and Google, among others, and claims to funnel 70% of global internet traffic through its facilities every day, yet powers this energy demand through coal." And again, I'll provide a link for this source. What this quote is really focusing on is it's not just climate control for our physical materials, but we also have to consider our data centers. Where are we storing the digital repositories we have? If we're just putting them up in the cloud, well, how are those vendors dealing with the issue of climate change? How are they powering both the servers themselves, but also the facilities to keep the servers cool? And is there an ethical issue here? Can we find better places to go for these services? So, how do we address these threats? This is kind of part 2 here. Well, there are both immediate actions and non-immediate actions. First off, we need to discuss the issues now. The time for kicking the can down the road has come and gone. We are already seeing the impacts of climate change in the world, and we're already starting to see its impact in cultural heritage institutions. So we need to become more aware. And by discussing the issues, it's not just amongst ourselves, but also discussing the issues with our funders, with our stakeholders, with the communities at large. We need to have disaster and emergency response plans created. But not just created, we need to adequately train the staff and then update it as needed. Every institution should identify potential regional climate change related threats. If you're in the Great Lakes region, it may not be hurricanes, it may actually be the polar vortices and severe heat waves and things like that. And then we also need to identify the most at-risk materials within a repository. Are there particular materials that, if you lost power for a week, for a month, that you would need to take care of first? Are there materials that you, if your repository is at severe risk of climate change threats, that you might need to consider moving or relocating or even transferring to another repository? The article I referred to earlier actually has some action steps and a nice chart at the end, and again I will share that below. There are also ongoing efforts, things that need to be done on an ongoing basis. First and foremost, reduce, reuse, and recycle. This is a common thread across culture in general, but within cultural heritage institutions, we can really do a lot here. We can reduce our waste. We can reuse materials, reuse folders, reuse housings, and make sure that we're actually recycling materials. Not just paper, not just aluminum and plastics, but also think about our electronics and how we properly dispose of materials. We can install low energy solutions like LED lighting. We can identify and reach out to regional repositories, other galleries, libraries, archives, and museums within our general area and collaborate to plan responses and to plan actions that can be taken together. And we can contact legislatures and the public at large, again, making them aware of these potential issues. Now, there are also less immediate actions. Now, I don't say long-term actions. We should still do these as soon as possible. We need to consider more efficient climate control systems. We need to make sure we're maintaining our existing climate control systems. Can we use more renewable energy? Could we use like geothermal for climate control? Can we use solar or wind power? We should also consider better building design. I know we're not all building new repositories, but as buildings are remodeled, as buildings are built, we need to consider things like better insulation, LEED certified buildings, etc. Should we consider moving the repository itself or just individual collections? And can we somehow redesign storage solutions to be more green, if you will? So, of course, this is not everything that can be discussed about this topic, but just a short primer to highlight some of the things at play here. I encourage you now to look at some of the readings, look at some of the websites, the additional videos that I am sharing and others are sharing, and engage in the online discussion on Facebook, on our Facebook event page, or on Twitter. Please, if you're using Twitter, include at LSU SLIS and the two hashtags here at the end of your tweet so we can gather them together and really engage in a conversation. Thank you for your attention and your time watching this video, and I hope that we can have a very fruitful discussion about this and consider these issues as imperative for both archivists, for museum curators, but for society as a whole.